Okay. Just to sort of fill you in terms of the background to sort of developing the budget for 26-27, clearly council and all other local authorities were experiencing impact of inflationary pressures, and particularly the complexity and significant cost demand pressures that we're all facing around social care, both children's and adults. And obviously the bits and pieces that are happening across the country in terms of the overall national economic and fiscal position. In terms of government funding announcements, a bit more trickier this year because basically the government did say that they were going to move to a multi-year settlement, which they have done, but also to actually have a look at the overall resource distribution of funding across the whole of the country. So it was quite a complex changes that were being made in terms of that local government funding, and the announcements for those did come late on in the day, so we didn't get our sort of final settlement till sort of late December. And as you're aware from previous years, we're always looking towards moving to an outcomes-based budget organisation, so effectively making sure that our resources are moved to where we want to see the outcomes for the organisation in terms of the administration's priorities, but also our council priorities as well. As you may have picked up over the year, and certainly over the last couple of years in terms of our budget monitoring reports, there's quite significant issues we faced as a council in terms of children's and adult social care in a number of areas. But as part of the budget processes over the last couple of years, we've been undertaking a process of impacting that structural budget deficit by putting in additional resources into those particular areas to make sure that we're getting to a much better position in year for the council's budget, and that will continue as part of the 26-27 budget. And I'll show you a bit later how we've actually worked on that this year. Obviously, clearly, it's really important, whilst we've still got LGR coming down the line, the local government reorganisation, and we'll know soon enough where we're placed as a council in that reorganisation. But it's really important that we have a proper, sustainable financial budget as we move into that new sort of arena of local authority setup. So difficult for financial circumstances, but we're continuing in the journey to make sure that we're in the right position when we set in the budget. So if you go on to the next slide, please, Karen. So what's effectively changed recently, talked about inflation and also the sort of financial management that we're having to undertake across the sort of financial sector and our own individual authority over the last couple of years. The late settlement we talked about, and we will get the final settlement in February 26, but we have enough from the draft settlement to set the budget going forward. Talked about how major upheaval it was to the local government funding process. So as an example, in the budget papers, you will see something like our revenue support grant has moved from about £7.5 million to around £42 million. I wouldn't automatically jump to the position that we've got an additional sort of £35 million in funding, because basically what happened, the government brought a load of grants into the revenue support grant. So the ups and downs overall mean we're just slightly up compared to 25-26. Talked about significant demand pressures in children and adults, that they have continued over the last couple of years, but significant work has been undertaken, particularly over the last 18 months around children's, to try and bring that round online as we move forward. And we've made some good inroads in the year around the children's budget, and more work has been done around adults as well. In terms of setting the budget, it's always good to know where we think we're going to be in the current financial year. The current financial year, which is reported as part of those suite of budget reports, is showing that we've still got a projected overspend as at the end of November of around just over £6 million. So with 4 months of the financial year to go, we've still got a lot of work to do to get us down to a balanced position. But the key issue that's really sort of providing that position of a projected overspend is around children still. So overall, the draft budget that's been put forward is a net investment budget, again for 26-27, and it's been set to sort of face those ongoing demand and cost pressures we face, particularly around children's and adults, and resolving and moving forward as best we can around our structural budget deficits. So if you move on to the next slide, please, Karen. So here are the key budget proposals for the revenue budget. Council tax increase, you probably would have already picked up 4.99%. The government expects local authorities to put their council tax up by 5%. So that's the sort of position we're at for that. General element of the 4.99 spent on general services of 2.99%, and for the adult social care precept of 2%, which is rolled in again. What's a good point to note though for Southend is that in terms of the council tax increase, that £1.73 weekly increase is at Band D level, whereas within Southend, 70% of our properties are in bands A, B and C, so they will have much lower weekly increases. We're unknown yet on the police and fire positions. We know those shortly. They will be added to the council tax. And Leigh Town Council was originally proposed at 13.07%. Now it's down to around 12.63%, and we should find out shortly what that final position will be. It's good to note as well, the budget for 26-27 is statutorily is balanced again, as is required, and with no use of general fund reserves. We are though using our sort of £1 million from the accumulated collection fund surplus, as is quite financially prudent to do so. So a balanced budget sets for strong foundations for the medium term, along with a transformation journey for the organisation. The report is a combined revenue and capital one, so bringing it all together, all of our resources. And on the next slides, I'll take you through some of the key proposed changes to the revenue budget and capital budget as well. So if you go on to the next slide, please, Karen. So I talked about the investments and unavoidable cost pressures going into the budget. So specifically to individual services, just around £15 million, and of that around 6.4 million is going into children's and around 7.6 million into adults. So you can see about £14 million of the £15 million is going into our key areas where we need to make sure that we're getting the budget in the right position. So that's part of that, as I talked about, that structural deficit amendment to make sure that we're getting those budgets aligned to where our spend is happening. The other key area of structural deficit change is around £400,000 in environmental and place services. That's predominantly to do with the less income we're receiving around SEMS and CREMS, but that's making sure that that's getting that budget more into line. So as you can see, £15 million going into sort of services across the council. All of the detail behind these descriptions, etc., are all contained within Appendix 5 of the main budget report, which I referred to earlier on. So on the next page, we have some more investment into the organisation. I'm not sure why there's something not showing up there. There it is. Yeah. So there's about another £6 million going into sort of like key like cross-cutting corporate areas, so mainly around inflation, contingency, pay award provision, etc., those types of things. So another £6 million going now. So overall, within this budget, nearly £21 million going into services and corporate services. On the other side, there's been about £6 million worth of savings identified under the corporate initiatives. £1.5 million of that is to do with our triennial pension fund revaluation. So every 3 years, pension funds revalued. We've been able to negotiate a reduction in our employer contributions to the pension fund by £1.5 million a year. We're still in a good surplus position though for our pension fund. And then obviously under the income generation and investment income, some good returns around investment income, but also sort of increases in fees and charges. But I'll talk a bit more about that later. But overall, a net budget growth of around just under £15 million for 26-27. If you go on to the next slide, please, Karen. So in terms of the impact of some of that, staffing, just under 24 FTE posts being removed from the total of 1850 for the council, so around 1.3%. But it's worth noting that nearly 19 FTE of that are vacant posts at the moment. We do have a transformation programme, so as it progresses throughout 26-27, it will undoubtedly identify further staff efficiencies as we move through each of those individual projects. But on the flip side, there's around about, with all that investment, which I talked about, £15 million into services, there's around 17 FTE posts going back into the budget. So overall, sort of a position whereby there's just a smaller reduction, net reduction in the overall number of FTEs for the council. Schools budgets generally in line with sort of 25-26 and maintained at their cash levels. Fees and charges I referred to earlier on, generally all going up 2.5% from April 26. So there are key exceptions to those increases. So car parking pay and display charges have been frozen. Bereavement services generally lowered, but a massive review of all of the various fees and charges under that sort of umbrella charges. Peer admission has been frozen. Highways, we move into more full cost recovery, so there'll be some increases there. A new bulky waste pricing structure and garden waste collection has been reduced as well. So if you go on to the next slide, please, Karen. So on the other side from revenue is our day-to-day spending. Capital is more of our longer-term investment spending. And so on the left-hand side table, you can see around £30.5 million. That's predominantly going into sort of our key infrastructure, maintaining all of that. So Southend Pier, 3.75 million. Footways and carriageways, another £4 million on top of the £4 million in the programme already. Some monies for car park improvements, the planetarium, and then the housing revenue account, where we have the need to make sure we're maintaining our general needs housing stock and sheltered housing unit stock. So some £18 million going into that across the capital programme period. On the right hand side though, there's a range of schemes as well, whereby we're looking at those in terms of viable business cases. So if financially, if they will stack up, then they will move into the programme. So I talked about a key infrastructure. There's some things we need to be doing around our bridge strengthening across the city. There's more money going in for play provision in parks. You will all probably seen the first £1 million spend on 4 parks. There's another £1 million going in to do more work on more parks across the city. And there's some other smaller area things there, but the key other big one there is around housing, about some strategic acquisitions, also temporary accommodation as well. So there's about sort of nearly £97 million going into that as well. So on the next slide, please. Just some, what this means in terms of the overall position. So it probably means we probably might need to borrow up to £25 million in 26-27, unless the market conditions become more favourable for us. The borrowing is really needed to repay maturing loans in the year. So we've got about just over £20 million of loans maturing. One is towards the end of 26-27, so I may not need to borrow to repay that in 26-27, but we'll see how things go throughout the year. It does mean though overall the capital investment programme, all the stuff that's going into the programme and what's currently in there. There's still investment into the city into a number of schemes from 26-27 through to 30-31 of £184 million. And then you can see how the programme is funded through external funding, borrowing, capital receipts, etc. On the next slide, please. So moving forward into the future slightly, given we've got the 3-year medium terms settlement from the government and the multi-year settlement, we're able to look forecast in terms of our medium-term financial plan a bit better into the later years. So you can see the various funding gaps there for each of the years, starting for 27-28 of 9.4, and then 7.6 in 28-29, etc. 28-29 onwards, obviously by then Southend will be part of a new unitary authority structure within Greater Essex, but it's really important that we as a council are still undertaking all of our financial assessments and ideas of projections of our finances going forward as and when we sort of like combine with other districts. So it's really important that we maintain that. But what is good is the multi-year settlement has enabled us to have a better idea of what that potentially could mean for us going forward. So on the next slide, please. So the housing revenue account is where we manage our general needs housing stock and sheltered housing unit stock. The average rent increase is going up by 4.8%. So that's for general needs and sheltered accommodation. Garage rents for tenants going up 4.8% as well, in line with that. And that 4.8% is the government's indicator of CPI plus 1%. And for non-tenants, the proposed increase is 25%. Service charges, excluding heating, same level as 25-26, and heating charges, given that we have to recover the expected costs, the proposed increase is around 12.5% for sheltered housing unit tenants. Bearing in mind though as well that probably 70% of our tenancies receive some form of housing benefit or universal credit support, so they won't be impacted in full by all of those increases that are listed above. Next slide, please. Nearly there, everyone. Hang in there. Key messages. Hopefully you would have seen that in terms of the demand pressures for services like children's, adults, waste and homelessness are driving what we need to invest and disinvest into the organisation. Still moving towards that outcome-focused organisation. As I said, a combined revenue and capital report. It is a balanced budget, net investment budget for 26-27 with no use of reserves and a good idea of where we're going with our financial planning for the future. But we do need, as part of the medium term, to deliver on our transformation programme across that sort of next 2 to 3 year period. But overall, the council is still in a relatively strong and resilient financial position. The next slide, please. However, there's obviously key risks to the council's finances in the medium term, potential any further changes around government funding, clarity on local government reforms, etc. And making sure the council, as it does, but to continue the key and proper VFM decisions on major contracts, the control of children's and adults. So despite the significant monies going into children's and adults, it's really important we are keeping very close eye and monitoring and making sure that we're keeping within the new budget set for both children's and adults into 26-27. We've got to ensure that that cost base that we've got as a council, we're controlling that cost base, and then obviously delivering value for money across all services as we move forward. Just keep an eye on inflation and interest rates, see what happens around those, but also what's really important for the council is its income, over £40 million of our budget is financed by our fees and charges budget. So it's really important that we are delivering against our fees and charges overall. And as I've mentioned before, making sure that we fully deliver upon our transformation programme, which will not only benefit the council's budget overall, it will deliver much better services to residents to keep them in touch better, and you'll see more efficient service delivery. And then the fly in the ointment, devolution and LGR, we should be knowing hopefully our position in March time, I believe, March, April. So we'll know roughly where we're going, in which group we shall be within. And then there will be lots of work will need to be done to move towards the sort of the position of 1st of April 28 when we become a new authority, new unitary authority. And devolution, as you know, probably the mayoral elections have been cancelled for 2 years. So again, that's to align. Well, it will come in April 28 as well. So we've got all of that happening. So we've got to keep a very close eye on that. So not only will we have to manage the council's normal day-to-day running service, we'll have to have an eye to the future of what we need, where we're going in the next few years. So next slide, please. And this is, I believe, the final slide. When we get to it. So budget timetable, next steps. This is just the set out where we launched the budget on the 8th of January. And as I mentioned, all the budget reports are on the council's website. So you've got access to those. Today, we're at the sort of business and voluntary sector consultation. This evening, the draft budget will be going to Cabinet for approval. We will then have policy and resources scrutiny of the draft budget on the 29th of January. Throughout January 26, I will do a range of opposition administration briefings to support that scrutiny process. And then on the 16th of February, the conclusion of any new final budget will go to Cabinet at that point. And then we will then go to full council, budget council on the 26th of February to agree the 26-27 council budget and then the council tax for 26-27. So that's the end of my presentation. So if you want to take the slides down. Right. Okay.
There are some questions, Joe. Would you like me to
Okay.
just run through? We've had some as you were presenting. Okay. The first question is from Murray Foster regarding staffing. So at this early stage, is AI being considered regarding staffing levels?
Daniel, do you want to?
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for the question. So we do make use of automation as best as we can. There's a big sort of difference between, I guess, AI and automation. Automation being taking away a lot of those manual repetitive tasks that to give staff more time to do their jobs, which is what we want them to do. AI is something that we need to be careful about how it's applied, and because actual AI trying to use that to replace jobs could potentially be difficult. But we are investing quite a lot into automation and looking at how we can improve services that way. We do have use of things like Microsoft Copilot, etc. And we have built alongside Microsoft a new tool which our social workers can use in children's services and adult social care, which will take their notes for them, freeing up a lot more of their time. But at this stage, we're not looking to completely replace jobs or processes with AI or with automation. We're looking to utilize it to free up more staff time, because we want staff to do more of their day job and less of the admin. So hopefully that answers your question, Murray. But if there's something more specific, I'll be happy to look into it.
Can I just add to that? So thanks, Dan. It's really helpful. Recently, we're looking at also the remaining sums of our apprenticeship levy. And one of the big things that we're looking at there is to bring in a number of apprentices across the organisation around AI as well. So that'd be really useful, not only for moving towards that sort of field of where the world's going at the moment, but also to bring in a number of apprentices to the council. I think Councillor Collins wanted to add something as well.
Yeah, I do. And thank you, Murray, for the question. And to just follow up from what the leader is saying, I mean, there's not going to be one single budget line here about AI saying it's going to save us X. It's across the organisation. But there is one line in there regarding customer channel shift in one of the appendices, where a small saving of £150,000 is expected in the following financial years, where we try to redirect our customers, be it businesses, be it individuals, into online forms and away from emails. We're going to try and remove emails or push people towards form because of record keeping, accuracy, and the ability to have transformation does mean that having data in an organised stream makes us more efficient for our customers. So that is part of a whole major programme of transformation. So no jobs will be lost for that, but we'll become much more efficient. Thank you, Joe.
There's another question here. Again, Murray Foster, is £25 million refinancing a typical level per annum?
If I start with that, we haven't borrowed for quite a number of years. We've been pretty good, I think, in terms of the way our borrowing has been managed over the years. I did take advantage of substantially lower interest rates, if anyone remembers, when they were very, very low. We did at that point in time take out some good bit of borrowing to put us into a good position for the council overall. It actually reduced our overall average borrowing rate. So I haven't borrowed for about 3.5, 4 years, I think it is now, something around about that sort of period. But as I've said, we need to plan to make sure what we need to do to keep ourselves in the right position. I do have some PWLB loans maturing this year in the order of just over £20 million. As I said, one of the large ones are towards the end of 26, 27, but I have to set myself a position on that, but I will look at that as we work through the year. And if things don't look right, we'll just have to carry on as we are. But we have to manage those things within what the interest rate environment is, as well as looking at all of our cash flow for the organisation to make sure we're managing that appropriately. So it may mean that if it is a cash flow issue, rather than sort of just repaying the loans, I might just need to dip into the short-term borrowing market rather than going long-term at this point in time, rather than sort of baking the council into sort of higher rates sort of thing, and increasing our pool rate. So I'll manage all of those things as we move forward. But in terms of a typical, it's probably untypical because we haven't borrowed for about 4 years or so now, sort of thing. But there will come a point in time where we will need to start borrowing, and if so the start of it is now, sort of thing. I think. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Oh,
Councillor Collins, I think, wanted to feedback.
Yeah, I just to take Joe's lead on that, Murray. Thank you for the question. We are at a borrowing level of £339 million, which we've been at, as Joe said, for 3.5 years. Our PWLB loans are over 25 to 30 years, and they don't all mature at the same time. They're spread across those decades. It happens that this financial year, 26-27, to mature. And we have to decide, as Joe just said, I'm not going to repeat exactly everything he said, whether or not what we do. They currently total 21.6 million, but there are two of them, one at the beginning of the financial year, one at the end. And because another one of your questions, how much will it cost to borrow this sort of money? I would hope, with a good organisation, the new loans that we have to purchase to keep us our cash flow as it is now will be less expensive as the maturities are. So it is a matter of knowing where you are at any one time. It's not atypical, but it's not unusual either. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. There's another question here, well, a comment and a question from Fern Potter. I seem to have missed any budget specifically for the voluntary sector and also for culture, apart from the pier and planetarium, yet culture is written into Southend City Vision. How will the city support cultural organisations, particularly those who cross into other areas, such as working with children and vulnerable adults?
Thanks, Ben. I'm happy to take that one, Joe. I think it's important to note that over the last two budgets, we put an extra 175,000. Well, actually, no, I think it's 275,000 when you add it all up. So well over £200,000 additional into the base budget, what we call the establishment budget for culture. So that wouldn't show up as a specific line, but the overall budget has increased and that's been maintained. So when they were put in, that extra money was put in initially, it was first as a budget amendment, then as a full budget line, and now it's now it's part of the establishment budget. There is also additional money in there for some location-based staff around museums and libraries. So there is additional money in there as well. So and we've also maintained some of the grant funding as well for people who are looking to do sort of small local ideas. That's been made part of the permanent base budget. So it is in there, but it's not in there as a specific line because it's work we've already done, but we're ensuring that it's maintained.
Thanks, Councillor Cowan. Another question here from Dawn Brown. Given the pressures on children and adults, has the council conducted a risk assessment which focuses on the local CVS who contribute to a mixed economy of care, sometimes bringing in additional grant resources? What will happen if they cease to deliver services due to parallel financial pressures?
Thanks, Ben. So I'll let colleagues in adults and children's, if they're on the call, to speak specifically around the risk assessment side. What I would say is that the focus on adults and children's isn't around how do we save money by reducing services. The focus has been how do we effectively, let's take children's for example, how do we make sure that more money is being spent on in-house fostering and on in-house residential care, and less money is going to private companies which are owned and backed by venture capitalists. So taking money out of the private sector and keeping it in care. So we have regular review panels in adults and children's which are looking at the overall quality of care, the needs of the individual, and benchmarking that across what we pay across various similar cases. In doing that, that's identified several £1 million worth of efficiency savings and overspend reductions. So we're finding ways to spend less without actually it affecting services or the quality of care. But as I said, I'll let colleagues in children and adults speak specifically to the risk assessment side, but I don't see the work that we've been doing around reducing spends in adults and children's creating a service gap that the voluntary sector is expected to pick up.
Thank you, Councillor Cowan. Again, there's two questions here from Riz at Citizens Advice and also Anthony Quinn at SAVS, both similar questions here. So what is the position on the voluntary sector investment for 26-27, community investment board, etc.? How much will the council receive through the new crisis and resilience fund replacing the household fund?
Joe, I don't know if you have the figures around crisis and resilience.
I'm taking it in reverse order. The crisis and resilience is basically replaces the household support fund, which was sort of like a rolling sort of fund that kept coming back sort of like every 6 months or a year or thereabouts. So the government have now introduced this crisis and resilience fund for 3 years, so that at least it gives us 3 years financial plan. We don't yet have the detailed allocations for that. The expectation though is, given the sum is the national total is the same as the household support fund, the expectation is we will receive similar funding for the council to support that. There has been an extension in the criteria about supporting people who've got difficulty with their income, etc., who go through issues, because previously the household support fund was things supporting like sort of food and sort of petrol or transport and different things like that, wasn't it? Sort of and like white goods, etc., those sort of things. And then there was some monies allocated through to the voluntary sector for them to distribute as well. We will pull together the new criteria for that fund from April. I fully expect the voluntary sector to be involved in that as well, in the role they played. Certainly with the household support fund, I would expect that to continue under the new fund going forward from April 26.
Thanks, Joe. Were there any other comments on that at all? If not, there's another question here from Jackie Stimpson at the Launchpad on the Airport Business Park. Regarding capital budget allocation for High Street regeneration and the Curzon, also noting the loss of the University of Essex and working towards a replacement university, and then sort of a follow-up comment about expecting multi-year funding for business support to replace core and UKSBF funding. And then there was also sort of an additional comment to that regarding the Growth Hub funding has been confirmed for a multi-year extension. So is there anything sort of similar around that for general business support?
Thanks, Ben. I'll take part of it, and I'll ask Joe to mop up the rest, if that's all right, Joe. Specifically around the High Street regeneration, so that's currently in the subject to viable business case, and the reason that doesn't have a particular figure attached to it at the moment is because we haven't done the public engagement and consultation side of it, which we should be doing in this springtime. So we have had consultants and designers working on how do we regenerate the High Street, and this is not just about putting down a new bit of pavement, which I think is probably the last thing that happened about 20 years ago. This is about a full-scale regeneration. So we have our economic inclusion and development team involved in this. We have culture involved in it, environment as well. So this is not just our highways guys coming in going, right, this is the best type of block paving to use, etc. We're looking at how do we make the High Street a more welcoming environment, a greener environment, a cleaner environment. How do we incorporate flood resilience, etc. So we have lots of different options that are being drawn up, and then we'll present that to the public for feedback, and that will allow us to come up with something a little bit more iterative, and thereby put some figures on it. I think there was a question there about the Curzon, just to say that we're continuing to work on bringing the Curzon back into use, and I'm confident that we will have some good news on that in the coming months. We've had good conversations today, and lots of willing partners who all want to get around the table and bring that back into use. And in terms of business support, Joe, I don't know if you wanted to talk about the multi-year settlement side of things.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Yeah, in terms of that, I mean, there's the part of the multi-year settlement. There's been a major rehash of all the grants across local authority, basically. So there's a massive review going on in terms of those grants, bringing a number of those into the revenue support grant calculation. So where we've got existing funding streams, they will continue in that position. But in terms of something like the UK PSF fund, I mean, that's being reviewed as well. So that there are looking at different options around what can come down the line for that. So as and when we know more, obviously we can announce that to yourselves. And
just to add about the university, I know there's been a few questions about that. Is as things currently stand, it's not something that is affecting the 26-27 budget position. But as with all budgets, we set it based on the information that we have available at a certain point in time, and then the picture becomes a bit clearer, usually about 6 months later, and that's when we put out our sort of revised position and our projections. There may well be a transitional impact, but we won't know what that will be until we get closer to the time. What we have to keep doing as an authority, working alongside our MPs and the Department for Education, is trying to find a way to resolve the situation with i.e. a new provider or an expansion of degree level courses through South Essex colleges to ensure that we continue to have higher education in Southend. And as long as we are able to successfully conclude all of that ahead of the next term starting, then there should be very little impact at all. So whilst the news from the University of Essex is not good, and it's incredibly frustrating that we got very late notice of the decisions that they were taking, and therefore have been a little bit on the back foot, the fact is that they've announced it all the way before the end of term. So we've got quite, not a huge amount of time, but we've got a good 6 months, and which is a reasonable amount of time to hopefully achieve something positive around that.
Thanks both. Another question here from Dawn Brown. Some local authorities, e.g. Merton, have made a commitment to full cost recovery for the voluntary sector to ensure the sustainability of this sector. Is the council considering this? I understand Merton recognises the value that the CVS brings in terms of outcomes and cost savings, and therefore wishes to ensure its sustainability.
I think that's one that we'll probably have to take a bit of a deeper look at and come back to you. We'll have to understand what Merton are doing and how they're doing it. Yeah. But certainly, if there's something more we can be doing to support the voluntary sector, then we'll look to do that. So we'll take that one away.
Thanks, Councillor Cowan. Again, another question here from Matt King at TrustLinks. How can the VCSE organisations enhance the delivery of adults and children's services by being commissioned to provide preventative and support services, thereby saving money within these services?
Well, I think a lot of it is just, keep doing what you're doing, making yourself available in supporting, our objectives and our aims. I think that, again, things will become a little bit clearer, certainly in children's services post-April, when the family's first funding kicks in, which is really focused on preventative action and how we might be able to commission local partners to work with us, to support us, to reduce pressure in that area. But we know that anything that we do around prevention, it is multi-years. So anything we start doing now, we probably won't see the long-term effects of for 3, 4, 5 years. So as they just keep having conversations with us, and there are lots of opportunities to commission services, and we are very keen to be working with local businesses and also with the voluntary sector, although maybe not directly related. We have been looking at some of our procurement rules internally and our procurement procedures to try to give a more competitive advantage to local providers. So hopefully that will mean that more our commissioning will be going out to local businesses and voluntary sector, and we'll be relying less on sort of national providers as well. And I think we've demonstrated with pretty much everyone on the call that we've worked with that there are opportunities for us to support what you're doing whilst you're also supporting what we're doing. I think Paul might want to come in on that particular item, Ben.
Yes, thank you. The social value policy is very important, and we are writing a new one to demonstrate to not just our stakeholders, the customers, but also the people that we'd work with, that we want to really push that forward. So whenever our procurement process goes forward, the businesses or individuals coming in to procure work from us, and it's a huge sum of money every year from any council. We're no different as a unitary authority across the care sector as well, that they have to demonstrate social value policy that meets our standards. That's going to be very important. We're going to put a mark down, a benchmark down, which will make the hopefully the customers' experience who receive these services better. My second comment about this, actually, as we move towards local government reform, Southend-on-Sea City Council will become part of the bigger picture. And I know that the voluntary sector that we deal with doesn't just sit on the boundaries, city boundaries. They stretch across. Trust Links goes across into other parts of Essex and similar. So I would be looking for help and support from these organisations on the call, because we need to understand how your services work in a bigger framework. So when we know what the new world looks like, and it will be this year, some point soon, we're going to be needing to have a conversation with all the organisations about how we look after people, because the boundary will fall away. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, councillors Collins and Cowan. This is another question here from Gavin at KMAC. So it begins here. So my annual question, in brackets, which will come as no surprise to Joe: what steps are being taken to remove the use of enforcement, aka bailiffs, for the growing number of vulnerable people in the city? How is the council determining who is vulnerable and who is simply avoiding payments? Have the council considered increasing the time frame for which people can pay tax and benefit overpayment debts? Debts paid eventually is better than not at all, in brackets, via writing debts off, and increased support costs because of pressure on mental health, housing impact, etc., etc., i.e. the council gets its monies and people become less reliant on costly services. Bit of a double-barreled question there.
Yeah, if I kick up on that one, I think I'll come back with my usual response in terms of the sort of corporate debt management policy that we have for the council, which is something I introduced many years ago, with the mantra of can't pay, won't pay sort of thing. So the people who won't pay, we will take the right enforcement action against those people. And the people that can't pay, there are a range of options and approaches. So in terms of one of the things that was mentioned there about longer term to repay debt, that is always an option, to speak to sort of council tax or other sort of services within the council in terms of repaying that debt over a longer period, because quite rightly, as you say, it's important that we recover the money in full, or as best we can, rather than writing the money off. And so we have that sort of approach, and we followed that quite well, I believe, with our enforcement agents over a number of years. There's always going to be the odd incident or two that may not sort of meet with relevant requirements, but we do make sure that we have sort of quarterly meetings with the enforcement agents, contract management meetings with them, to make sure that they're applying and taking on board the element regarded within their specification and contract regarding how they treat vulnerable people. So we will continue to do that. But at the end of the day, it's really vital and important, as I mentioned earlier on, that we're reliant upon over 40 odd £million of fees and charges coming in to the council for various elements. On top of that, you've got all the council tax and business rates that we need to collect. So a significant proportion of the council's budget is reliant upon recovering or charging and recovering in as best we can in full all of those particular sums. So we will do everything we can within our power to make sure we are being appropriate in terms of our judgment around individuals, in terms of those who are deliberately trying to avoid making payment. We will take the right and appropriate enforceable action. And those that who need much more support, there are a number of range of support mechanisms that we do apply religiously across the teams to make sure that we support those individuals in repaying the due debt that is owed to the council. So I think that's where I'll leave that particular point, unless anyone wants to make any further comment.
Great, thank you, Joe.
Okay.
Another question here from Gemma Fisher. You have empty roles. Is there any way to reintroduce / increase the community team?
So I think this is the team that Charlotte Barker used to be part of. I'm assuming. I can't see anyone on screen sort of nodding, etc. I mean, my understanding of that team is that it went through a restructure, and the roles themselves haven't disappeared, but they have been absorbed within a broader team. I think in some respects, I understand that changes in the way that teams operate, and we often get used to who we talk to and the relationships that we build. What we've been trying to move to, and I'll speak about this more broadly across the organisation over the last couple of years with the restructures that we've been doing within the teams. The restructures their main focus hasn't been on trying to simply just to save money, which has been the primary motivator of restructures in the past. What we're trying to do now with a lot of our restructures is to ensure that we have the right people doing the right jobs, but also that we are eradicating single points of failure. And Councillor Collins and I were at a meeting last week, regarding some highways works that affect our ward, and there was a single point of failure there. The highways officer did an absolutely fantastic job, cannot fault them whatsoever, but information would have ordinarily been shared with us a lot sooner than it was, but it wasn't because that person was off sick. So what we need to do is try to eradicate single points of failure across the organisation, so that when a person leaves, or they take a secondment, or if they're off sick, or they're on leave or holiday, etc., that things don't stop. So that is what's happened a lot with the community team, is try to spread that load around a bit more. But again, with what we've done with the 17 roles that we've introduced, new roles, is that if we feel that there are opportunities for us to enhance our service offering, we'll look at it. So we'll keep an eye on that community team, and we'll see if there is a need to expand it in the future, and we'll do exactly what we've done with all the other roles that we've introduced this year. We'll look at those defunct positions, those that we can do without, those we can manage in a different way, and then we'll look to offset that against the new jobs that we need to create, and in the future communities may be part of that.
Thank you, Councillor Cowan. Another question here in the Q&A from Kay. Do apologise, there's no surname, but this is from Kay. This is regarding delivering sustainable projects aimed at reducing the impacts of climate change. So the question is, are you using existing consultation and plans, or are the council starting again? How much will be spent on consultants?
Is this in respect to the high street?
It was regarding, delivering, just generally about delivering sustainable projects aimed at reducing the impacts of climate change. So maybe this is around, the high street or even City Beach.
Sure. So we have been actually building capacity within the team. So part of those restructures that I spoke of has created actual revenue resource within climate change, whereas before there was only a capital budget. There's now a revenue budget, and there's the ability to expand that team and to recruit people in. So there will always be a need on a project by project basis to use or have consultants to support us. That's often the right thing to do, because often some of the work that gets done across the council that we use consultants for is one-off work. Hiring in that knowledge, that resource on a permanent basis just wouldn't make financial sense. So we utilize contractors and consultants for short periods of time on project-based work. Around climate change and carbon reduction, we do have in-house environmental officers, and we also have new roles that are being created last year around carbon reduction as well, and climate change. So there will be less of a need to utilize external resource on that moving forward. And in terms of work around the high street, we will not be completely starting from scratch, but we will be doing a lot of the work has been done again, because the last set of work that was done came up with a £600,000 what they called a regreening the high street project, which effectively equated to a handful of planters with no real trees or greenery in the high street, and a couple of benches, and some what they call scramble rocks for kids, which I didn't feel was a good use of £600,000 worth of money, and was likely something that we would rip up after a couple of years, because we've had this long-term regeneration ambition for the high street. So there is some work that is being done again, but it is being done in the context of what would it look like if we did this, because the work that was done previously is work that we've discounted as something that's not suitable for our high street.
Thank you, Councillor Cowan. Again, another question here from Kay. This is regarding, from the draft budget, discretionary housing payments and the household support fund. So the question is, do changes in the new grant funding scheme reduce or further limit availability to people?
If I pick that one up, I think it's under the Daniel, it's the Crisis and Resilience Fund. As I mentioned earlier on in my response, they have extended the criteria, but we will now work through what that will mean. Overall, we believe we should get roughly the same amount as we've had previously, but we should know it for the next 3 years. So not expecting it to reduce the impact on the amounts that we are paying out through that fund. And actually we are pretty good as an authority, because the discretionary housing payments and the crisis resilience fund, formerly household support fund, we always spend every penny of it every year. So
thank you, Joe. Question here from, I believe it's Gavin at KMAC. Tackling poverty strategy working has all but disappeared. Very frustrating. All good work has vanished. This was raised a concern at a time. That's actually more of a comment than a question, but wondering if you had any reflections on that, either of you.
So I covered that in the communities question. So that particular role has been absorbed across a wider group of people. I'm quite happy to take that up with the Executive Director for Communities to discuss further and ensure that any assurances that are required are made, and if there are tweaks that need to be made, that we look at it. But as far as we're concerned, the tackling poverty strategy is still very much in place and is still very much a focus, albeit not being handled through a single person. As I said, we're trying to get rid of those single points of failure. That particular job itself was a role that was a temporary role anyway. The person who filled it did a fantastic job, but they've had an opportunity to move on to a more secure role elsewhere. And we have to understand that, you know, people will look to do what's right for them as well. So that role itself has been absorbed across a broader team. But I take on board the comments that you're making, Gavin, and I'll pick it up with the Exec Director.
Excellent, thank you. Again, this is a comment from Murray Foster. So Councillor Cowan mentioned that a high street review is being undertaken. Murray notes that he was unaware of that.
Well, I will have to have a chat with the officers involved and what engagement that they've been undertaking with businesses. This is a cross-departmental piece of work, incorporating lots of officers from lots of areas, and there will certainly be engagement with businesses as part of that. I believe the bid have been involved, but I'll pick that up with the teams and come back to you, Murray.
Thanks, Councillor Cowan. This is another question from Kay regarding public health. Are any funds ring-fenced to increase school nursing to improve early intervention? Oh, that's from Kay Mitchell.
The total public health budget is ring-fenced anyway, and within that there is quite a significant sum of money set aside for school nursing. I'm not aware that the actual amount is increasing, so it will be in line with 25-26, but all within the ring-fenced public health grant.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe. I think we've come to the end of the questions and comments. I've tried to keep a bit of an eye across both the chat and the Q&A. If anyone else has any further questions or reflections for Councillor Cowan or Joe, please pop them in the Q&A now, just so we can sort of wrap this up and make sure everyone has an answer.
Oh, just a quick word from me, Ben, to just thank everyone for coming along to the briefing for the business and voluntary sector, but also to thank you for all the work that you all continue to do for the city day in, day out. It's much appreciated, and without your support, we wouldn't be able to deliver the services that we do.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you,
Bye.
Councillor Cowan.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye, everyone.